I used to scream at my screen whenever I read The Alpha's Rise. I couldn't stand the main character, Leon. He had everything: looks, unimaginable wealth, a loving family, and the coveted status of a high-tier Omega. Yet he threw it all away for a trashy, ungrateful alpha named Julian. I remember violently typing out a comment on the novel's forum. If I were Leon, I wouldn't waste a single dime on that loser. I'd make him crawl. Be careful what you wish for. I blinked against the harsh morning sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a cold, minimalist penthouse. I sat up, my head pounding, and looked down at my hands. They were slender, pale, and perfectly manicured. I stumbled into the master bathroom and stared at the mirror. Staring back at me was Leon. I was Leon. The memories of the original owner flooded my mind like a broken dam. Original Leon was a spoiled, pampered Omega who had fallen devastatingly in love at first sight with Julian, a poor alpha from their college. Julian was drowning in debt, his mother's hospital bills, his tuition, his daily expenses. Leon, in his foolish, desperate attempt to buy love, paid it all off. He covered the hospital bills, wiped out the debt, and in exchange forced Julian to date him. To Julian, it wasn't love. It was a hostage situation. He resented Leon's wealth, viewing his generosity as an arrogant display of power. But original Leon didn't stop there. He funded Julian's startup, funneling his powerful family's resources, connections, and capital into Julian's hands. After they married, the real nightmare began. For 3 years, Julian froze Leon out. He emotionally abused him, isolated him, and blatantly cheated on him with his childhood sweetheart, a sweet-looking Omega named Max. Original Leon just kept taking it, his natural sparkle dying day by day, hoping Julian would eventually see his devotion. I gripped the edges of the marble sink, my knuckles turning white. I remembered the ending of the novel perfectly. Julian uses Leon's family resources to build an empire, then ruthlessly bankrupts Leon's family. He throws Leon to the wolves, literally selling him off to clear remaining debts, and lives happily ever after with Max. Not anymore, I whispered to my reflection, splashing cold water on my face. You wanted my money, Julian? You're about to find out what happens when the bank closes. I didn't waste a single hour. I called the best family lawyers in the city, had the papers drafted up at lightning speed, and waited in the dining room of our sprawling, sterile penthouse. At 7 p.m., the front door clicked open. Julian walked in. He was undeniably handsome. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and an intimidating alpha aura, but to me, he just looked like a parasite. He didn't even glance in my direction. He reeked of cheap cologne and another Omega's sweet pheromones. Max's. I'm tired, Leon, Julian muttered, loosening his tie as he walked past the dining table. Don't start with your usual whining tonight. I had a long day at the office. The office my father bought for you? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly turned around, his eyes narrowing in irritation. Excuse me? What did you just say? I picked up the thick manila folder from the glass table and tossed it toward him. It slid across the smooth surface, stopping right at the edge. I'm not whining, Julian. Actually, I have great news for you, I said, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. I'm setting you free. Julian frowned, looking down at the folder, but refusing to touch it. What kind of childish game is this, Leon? If this is another one of your pathetic attempts to get my attention— Open it, I interrupted, projecting an icy, commanding tone that made him flinch. Original Leon had never spoken to him without trembling. Julian yanked the folder open. His eyes scanned the first page, and the color instantly drained from his face. Divorce papers? You're filing for divorce? Irreconcilable differences, though I heavily considered citing infidelity, I replied smoothly, standing up. You keep the car you bought last month. I keep the penthouse, considering my name is the only one on the deed. Everything else is split exactly as the prenuptial agreement dictates. You, Julian stammered, his alpha pride warring with sudden panic. You think you can just throw this at me after forcing me into this marriage? Oh, please. You weren't a hostage, Julian. You were a gold digger, I laughed, a sharp mocking sound. I bought you, and frankly, The return on investment has been abysmal. You're dismissed. Sign the papers or my lawyers will make this a very public, very ugly spectacle. Let's see how your new investors like the headline, CEO Julian Vance bankrupted by cheating scandal. I didn't wait for his response. I picked up the single designer travel bag I had packed with my essentials, walked right past his stunned figure, and headed out the door. The sound of it slamming shut behind me was the most satisfying thing I had heard in 2 lifetimes. The drive to my family's estate took less than an hour. Unlike the cold penthouse, the Sterling family mansion was warm, bustling, and dripping in old money. As soon as I walked through the green mahogany doors, the head butler gasped, "Young Master Leon, we, we weren't expecting you." "It's good to be home, Henry. Is my father in his study?" "Yes, sir, but—" I didn't wait. I strode through the opulent hallways and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the study. My father, Arthur Sterling, a formidable alpha who controlled half the city's commerce, looked up from his desk. His stern face immediately softened into a look of deep concern. "Leon, my boy, what are you doing here at this hour?" He stood up, rounding the desk. "Did that bastard Julian do something to you?" "I left him, Dad," I said, stepping into my father's embrace. It felt strange, accepting the warmth of a man I only knew through a book, but the original Leon's body reacted with immediate, desperate relief. My father pulled back, his hands on my shoulders. "You left him? Truly?" "I've filed for divorce today," I confirmed, looking him dead in the eye. "I was blind, Dad. I was a fool who thought I could buy someone's heart. He's been cheating on me, using my affection to fund his ambitions, while treating me like dirt. I'm done." Arthur's eyes darkened with raw alpha fury. "I will ruin him. I'll tear his company down to the foundations." "No, Dad, let me do it," I interrupted, my voice steady. "But I need your help. We need to strike before he realizes what's happening." My father paused, studying my face. He looked surprised by the cold clarity in my eyes, a far cry from the weeping, desperate Omega I had been for the last 3 years. "What do you need?" I walked over to his desk and tapped my manicured finger against the mahogany wood. "First, pull every single piece of sterling backing from Vance Enterprises. Call the banks. Tell them our family no longer guarantees his loans. Second, our supply chains. I know for a fact he relies on our shipping contracts to keep his profit margins afloat. Sever them. Cite a breach of contract. His divorce from me violates the morality clause in the family's subsidiary agreements." My father's lips slowly curled into a proud, dangerous smile. "You want to completely cut his oxygen supply?" "I want to watch him suffocate," I corrected, my tone pleasant but completely ruthless. "Julian thinks he built his empire with his own 2 hands. He thinks I'm just an arrogant show-off. Let's show him exactly what arrogance looks like when the money dries up." I leaned against the desk, feeling the immense power of my new reality. The original Leon died of a broken heart, shivering in the cold, while Julian toasted to his ruin. "Rest in peace, Leon," I thought. "I've got the steering wheel now, and I'm driving straight over him." For the first time since transmigrating into this novel, I was actually enjoying myself. The original Leon had spent the last 3 years locked away in a dreary penthouse, wearing dull, conservative sweaters because Julian didn't like it when other alphas looked at his Omega. Well, Julian wasn't here, and I had a closet full of designer clothes that cost more than a small island. I slipped into a sheer black silk button-down that draped perfectly over my collarbones, paired it with leather pants, and headed out. Tonight was about reclaiming my life. I had called up the original Leon's best friends, Chloe, a fiery, sharp-tongued Omega heiress, and Dante, a laid-back but fiercely protective beta who owned half the city's real estate. For 3 years, the original Leon had completely ghosted them because Julian claimed they were bad influences. When I called them, they were hesitant at first, but the moment I told them I had filed for divorce, they practically teleported to my mansion to drag me out to Neon Eden, the most exclusive VIP club in the city. We were lounging in a private velvet booth, sipping on vintage champagne that cost a year's tuition. "I still can't believe it," Chloe said, tossing her platinum blonde hair over her shoulder. She pointed her crystal flute at me. "You actually served the leech with papers? I've been praying for this day. I literally lit a candle at the church last Sunday. Dante laughed, throwing an arm over the back of the plush sofa. I was ready to hire a hitman, honestly. But divorce is good too. Cheaper, less paperwork. I laughed, taking a sip of my drink. I was blind, guys, but I can see perfectly now. The charity case is officially closed. We toasted, the music thumping pleasantly against the floorboards. It was a perfect night, until, of course, the plot decided to violently intrude. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Chloe muttered, her smile vanishing. She glared over my shoulder. "Look what the sewer dragged in." I turned my head. Striding through the neon-lit crowd, parting the sea of socialites, was Julian. And clinging tightly to his arm, wearing a sickeningly sweet smile and an oversized sweater, was Max, the childhood sweetheart, the affair partner, the innocent white lotus. Julian's eyes scanned the VIP section and locked onto me. I watched the realization hit him, followed immediately by a dark, possessive anger. He marched over to our booth, Max trailing behind him like a lost puppy. "Leon!" Julian barked, his voice cutting through the bass of the club. He stood at the edge of our table, glaring down at me. "What do you think you're doing here?" I slowly lowered my glass, raising an eyebrow, drinking champagne, sitting, breathing. "Do you need me to spell it out for you?" Julian's jaw clenched. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering furiously on my sheer silk shirt. "Look at what you're wearing. This isn't a place for a respectable Omega, and you shouldn't be drinking. You know I don't like it when you go out to places like this." I stared at his face. I literally just stared at him in profound, silent disbelief. Was this man actually dumb? Had the cheap cologne seeped into his brain and dissolved his last remaining brain cells? "Julian," I said slowly, enunciating every syllable as if speaking to a toddler, "I filed for divorce. I don't care what you like. I don't care what you think. And I certainly don't care about your rules." Julian scoffed, crossing his arms. He actually looked smug. "Listen, Leon, I know you're just throwing a tantrum because I've been busy with work lately. You filed those papers to get my attention. Fine, you have it." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like he was the one making a huge sacrifice. "If you come home right now, change out of those ridiculous clothes and apologize for this embarrassing stunt, I'll forget this ever happened. I won't divorce you." For a second, the entire booth was dead silent. Even the club music seemed to fade into the background. In the past, the original Leon would have burst into tears if his friends had dared to say a negative word about his precious Julian. He would scream and defend him. But I just looked at Chloe and Dante, gave them a wide, wicked grin, and gestured to Julian with a flick of my wrist. "Have at him," I said. Chloe slammed her glass on the table and stood up. She was a foot shorter than Julian, but her aura was terrifying. "Are you completely delusional or just functionally illiterate?" Chloe snapped, her voice carrying over the music. "He served you divorce papers, you absolute gold-digging clown. What part of a legal summons translates to 'I want your attention' in that hollow skull of yours?" Julian's face flushed dark red. "Excuse me? You keep out of my marriage, Chloe." "What marriage?" Dante chimed in, leaning forward with a lazy, mocking smile. "You mean the 3-year hostile takeover of the Sterling family bank accounts? Tell me, Julian, did you pay for your entry fee tonight, or did you put it on the credit card Leon's dad gave you?" "How dare you?" Julian roared, taking a threatening step forward. "No, how dare you?" Chloe shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly at Max, who was cowering behind Julian. "And you, bringing your little discount store homewrecker to my booth. Max, honey, I know you're used to taking Leon's hand-me-downs, but have some self-respect." Max's eyes instantly welled up with tears. I, I didn't do anything. Julian and I are just friends. Why are you being so mean?" "Oh, save the crocodile tears for someone who cares, you little hypocrite," I laughed, finally standing up to face them. I stepped right into Julian's personal space, unaffected by his pathetic attempts to intimidate me. "Let me make this crystal clear, Julian. You are nothing without me. You're a leech who sucked my family dry, and now the salt is coming. Take your little side piece and get out of my sight before I have security throw you out." Julian looked like he was about to explode. He opened his mouth, his hands balled into fists. But before he could shout, Max grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Julian, stop," Max whispered, his voice trembling perfectly. "Don't stoop to their level. Please, let's just go." Julian glared at me, his chest heaving. "You're going to regret this, Leon. You're going to come crawling back." "I'd rather crawl through broken glass," I chirped cheerfully. "Bye now." As they retreated into the crowd, I watched Max tug Julian toward the exit. Despite the loud music, I could practically read Max's body language as he stroked Julian's chest, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Max was whispering furiously, "Don't listen to him, Julian. He's just jealous. He's putting on a show for his friends because he's insecure about us. You know how he is. He's always been obsessed with you. He'll never actually go through with the divorce. He just wants you to chase him." Julian's tense shoulders visibly relaxed. He took a deep breath, nodding as he absorbed Max's toxic reassurance. "You're right. He's just playing hard to get. He's always been a spoiled brat throwing tantrums." Julian sneered back in my direction, completely convinced of his own narrative. "Give it 3 days. Once he realizes his little trick isn't working, he'll be crying at my door with his checkbook." I watched them leave, bursting into genuine, uncontrollable laughter. "What's so funny?" Dante asked, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. "Nothing," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "I just realized that destroying him is going to be the most fun I've ever had in my entire life. Cheers to the bankruptcy." "Cheers!" Chloe and Dante yelled in unison, clinking their glasses against mine.
After Julian and Max's pathetic exit, the night had truly begun. Chloe ordered a second bottle of vintage champagne, then a third. Dante kept the shots coming. For a transmigrator who had just shed 3 years of fictional, suffocating trauma, the alcohol tasted like pure, unadulterated freedom. By midnight, the club was a blur of neon lights and heavy bass. My friends were completely wasted, slumped against each other in the velvet booth, giggling at a joke I couldn't comprehend. I felt dizzy, my blood humming with a reckless, fiery energy. "I'm gonna dance," I slurred, patting Dante's shoulder. "Don't get kidnapped by a goblin," Chloe called out, waving a limp hand. I stumbled out of the VIP section and merged into the writhing sea of bodies on the dance floor. I just wanted to move, to feel the music vibrating through the floorboards. I closed my eyes, swaying to the rhythm, completely lost in the euphoria of no longer being the tragic, weeping Omega. But a club is still a club. Suddenly, a heavy, clammy hand grabbed my waist. I opened my eyes to see a strange alpha pressing himself against my back. His pheromones smelled like cheap beer and sour sweat, suffocating and aggressive. "Hey there, gorgeous," the creep murmured, his hot breath hitting my neck. "An Omega like you shouldn't be dancing all alone. Why don't you come with me?" "Get your hands off me," I snapped, trying to pull away, but my head spun wildly. The alcohol was betraying my motor skills. His grip tightened, bruising my hip. "Don't be like that. I can show you a good." Before the creep could finish his sentence, the suffocating scent of sour sweat was entirely annihilated. A new scent washed over the area, an overwhelming, intoxicating wave of aged whiskey, dark pine, and ozone just before a thunderstorm. It was an alpha pheromone so pure, so dominant, that it commanded immediate submission. A large, muscular arm wrapped around my shoulders, yanking me flush against a rock-solid chest. I heard a sickening crack as the stranger twisted the creepy alpha's wrist backward. He said, a voice rumbled, deep and terrifyingly calm, "Get your hands off him. Walk away before I break it." The creep whimpered, his face pale with sudden terror. He didn't hesitate, he scrambled backward and disappeared into the crowd like a rat. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. The man holding me was devastatingly handsome. He had sharp, aristocratic features, a strong jawline, and piercing, dark eyes that held a tempest of authority. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored, dark charcoal suit that screamed old money, but the top buttons of his shirt were undone. He looked down at me, his intense gaze softening just a fraction. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low, soothing baritone. I was completely mesmerized. The alcohol in my system mixed with his overwhelming, intoxicating pheromones, turning my brain into absolute mush. "He saved me," my drunk mind reasoned. "He's so hot. Julian looks like a trampled potato next to him. Thank you, I whispered, gazing up at his lips. And then, operating entirely on reckless instinct, I grabbed the lapels of his expensive jacket, pulled myself up on my tiptoes, and crashed my lips against his. He froze. For a second, he was entirely rigid beneath my touch. I kissed him clumsily, pouring all my dizzy gratitude into it. When he didn't immediately respond, I whimpered softly, pressing closer to his warmth. Suddenly, his hands clamped down on my waist. He pulled back, breaking the kiss. His chest was heaving slightly, his eyes burning with a sudden, dark fire. Omega, he growled, his voice thick with restraint. You are drunk. You don't know what you're doing. I do, I breathed, chasing his lips again. I trailed my hands up his chest, tangling my fingers in his thick, dark hair. I want to. You saved me. He caught my wrists, holding them firmly against his chest. The air between us was crackling, thick with a heavy, magnetic tension. I am not a saint, he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper right against my ear. If you continue to look at me like that, if you keep touching me, I will lose control. And I will not let you regret it in the morning. I won't regret it, I promised, looking up at him through half-lidded eyes. Take me out of here. The last thread of his control snapped. He groaned, a deeply primal sound, and crushed his mouth against mine. This time, there was no hesitation. His kiss was possessive, demanding, and incredibly skilled. His hands gripped my waist, lifting me slightly off the floor as he devoured my mouth, his tongue exploring mine with a fiery passion that made my knees buckle. If he hadn't been holding me, I would have collapsed. The rest of the night was a dizzying, passionate blur. I remember the flashing lights of the club fading into the dim, luxurious lighting of a penthouse hotel suite. I remember being pressed against a cool wall, his hot skin against mine, the sound of clothes tearing and zippers failing. His touch was electric. He worshipped my skin, his large hands mapping every inch of my body, leaving trails of fire wherever he touched. I remember arching into him, crying out his name, or maybe I didn't even know his name. The passion was utterly consuming, drowning out all my past lives, all my memories of Julian, all my pain. There was only the heat, the heavy scent of whiskey and pine, and the suffocating, brilliant pleasure of being completely owned by the man in the dark. I woke up to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the morning sun piercing through the sheer curtains of the hotel room. My head was pounding with the mother of all hangovers. I groaned, burying my face in the silk pillows. Then, I felt it. A heavy, muscular arm was draped securely over my waist, pulling my bare back flush against a very broad, very naked chest. My eyes snapped open. Oh, my God. The memories hit me like a speeding freight train. The club. The creep. The handsome stranger. The kiss. Everything else. I carefully turned my head. The Alpha was still fast asleep, his dark hair messy against the white pillow. In the daylight, he was even more ridiculously gorgeous. His chiseled chest was lightly marked with scratches, my scratches. A wave of profound embarrassment crashed over me. My face burned so hot I thought it might spontaneously combust. He hadn't taken advantage of me, I had practically thrown myself at him. He had even warned me. I seduced a complete stranger in a drunken haze just hours after serving my husband divorce papers. Panic set in. I couldn't deal with this. I couldn't do the awkward morning after conversation. I was Leon Sterling, a man on a mission of vengeance, not a romantic comedy protagonist. Moving with the stealth of a ninja, I slid out from under his arm. I quietly gathered my clothes, wincing as I pulled my pants up over my sore hips. The Alpha really didn't hold back. Fully dressed, I tiptoed toward the door, but stopped at the nightstand. I couldn't just leave without saying anything. But I also didn't have a pen. I reached into my designer wallet, pulled out my unlimited, solid metal black card, and slapped it down onto the nightstand. It was a terrible, arrogant gesture, but it was all I had. Consider it payment for services rendered, I thought, cringing internally. No note. No contact number. Two strangers passing in the night. I slipped out of the room, closing the door silently behind me, and took a private elevator down to the lobby. By the time I returned to the Sterling mansion, the embarrassment was fading, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I took a scalding hot shower, scrubbing away the intoxicating scent of whiskey and pine that stubbornly clung to my skin. I couldn't afford to be distracted by a one-night stand. I wrapped myself in a plush bathrobe and sat at the vanity, staring at my reflection. My eyes were sharp, determined. Focus, Leon, I muttered to myself. The alpha from the club was a closed chapter. It was a moment of reckless indulgence, a goodbye to my repressed past. Today, the real war began. I picked up my phone and dialed my father's executive assistant. Martha. It's Leon. Yes, I'm fine. Tell my father to freeze the shipping routes to Vance Enterprises immediately. It's time to show Julian what bankruptcy feels like. Miles away from the Sterling mansion, in the opulent silence of the penthouse suite, the alpha finally stirred. He reached out blindly across the tangled silk sheets, expecting to pull the warm, intoxicating Omega back into his chest. His hand met nothing but cool, empty space. His dark eyes snapped open. The room was empty. The lingering scent of the Omega, a delicate, addictive fragrance of crushed vanilla and rain, was the only proof the night hadn't been a hallucination. He sat up, the sheet pooling around his waist, exposing a torso marked with red scratches. Then, his eyes landed on the nightstand. There, resting perfectly in the center of the mahogany wood, was a solid metal black card. A slow, dangerously dark smile spread across the alpha's handsome face. He picked up the heavy card, flipping it between his long fingers. A black card. Limitless. The little Omega hadn't just run away, he had left him a tip. The bedroom door clicked open, and a man in a sharp black suit stepped inside, bowing deeply. Boss. You called. Thomas stood up, entirely unfazed by his own nakedness, and tossed the black card to his right-hand man. He wasn't just any alpha. He was Thomas, the undisputed king of the country's underground. A mafia boss whose mere name made seasoned politicians sweat and rival syndicates crumble. Take this, Thomas ordered, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated with barely contained excitement. Track the account. I want a name. I want an address. I want every single piece of information on the Omega who owns it on my desk by tonight. His subordinate caught the card, his eyes widening slightly before he quickly masked his shock. Right away, boss. Is there a problem? Thomas chuckled, a sound that lacked any warmth but held a predatory thrill. He walked toward the glass window, looking out over the city he owned. He inhaled the faint, lingering scent of vanilla. No problem, Thomas murmured, his eyes flashing red for a fraction of a second. I'm just going to hunt my little bunny. Back in the sunlit study of the Sterling mansion, I was sipping an iced matcha latte while my father's financial team executed the massacre of Vance Enterprises. At exactly 10 a.m., the bank accounts were frozen. At 10:15 a.m., the shipping contracts were voided. By 10:30 a.m., my phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed. Julian, do not answer. I answered it immediately. Leon. Julian's voice exploded through the speaker, so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. What the hell do you think you're doing? The banks just called me. Your father's company just pulled their backing. Tell them to fix this error right now. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my latte. Oh, Julian, did your mommy not teach you how to read a balance sheet? It's not an error. It's a withdrawal. You know, like taking out the trash. Are you insane? Julian roared, genuine panic bleeding into his alpha rage for the first time. You're jeopardizing my entire company. Over a petty tantrum. I told you last night, if you apologize. Julian, I interrupted, dropping the playful tone. My voice turned to absolute ice. Your company is my company. I bought it. I built it. I funded it. And now, I am dismantling it. Enjoy bankruptcy. Click. I hung up and tossed the phone onto the sofa. Julian's pride was a fragile, bloated thing. Despite the financial guillotine hovering over his neck, his ego convinced him that I was just throwing a colossal fit to get him to beg. 3 hours later, the intercom buzzed. It was the front gate security. Young Master Leon, Mr. Vance is here. He's demanding entry. Let him into the courtyard, I said, a wicked smile creeping onto my face. I walked out to the grand front steps of the mansion, flanked by 4 very large, very intimidating Sterling family bodyguards. Julian marched through the wrought iron gates, looking furious but trying to maintain a facade of magnanimous authority. Leon. Enough of this childish game. Grab your things. I'm taking you home. I looked around the sprawling, perfectly manicured estate, then back at his red face. I am home, Julian. You're trespassing. Stop embarrassing yourself, Julian snapped, taking a step toward the stairs. You've made your point. You got my attention. Now come back to the penthouse before you do permanent damage to my business. I burst out laughing. It echoed across the courtyard. Your business? Oh, sweetie, you're in so much debt right now that your left kidney legally belongs to my father. Guards. The four massive bodyguards stepped forward in unison. Throw him out, I ordered cheerfully. Like a dog. Julian didn't even have time to react. Two guards grabbed him by the arms, lifting him entirely off the ground. Hey, unhand me. Leon, tell them to let me go. Julian thrashed, his expensive suit wrinkling as his alpha aura flared uselessly against the trained professionals. They dragged him to the gate and quite literally tossed him onto the pavement. He landed in an undignified heap. Before I could head back inside to celebrate, a sleek white car pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped Max, wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a look of practiced, trembling distress. He rushed over to help Julian up, then rushed to the gate, gripping the iron bars like a tragic heroine in a cheap soap opera. Leon, please, Max cried, forcing tears into his large eyes. Don't do this. Don't ruin Julian's life over a misunderstanding. There is nothing between us, I swear. We are just friends. Please, don't let your jealousy destroy his hard work. I slowly walked down the steps, stopping just on the other side of the gate. I looked at Max, tilting my head. Just friends? I asked, feigning shock. Wow. Is the just friends package the one where you leave your cheap discount store pheromones all over his collar? Or is it the one where you text him at 2 a.m. asking him to come over and fix your plumbing? Max choked, his fake tears vanishing in an instant as his face turned beet red. Your acting is terrible, Max, I sneered. If you want to play the innocent white lotus, you need to work on your crying. It looks like you're just constipated. I looked over at Julian, who was dusting off his trousers, his face twisted in humiliated fury. Take your stray and get off my property before I have the sprinklers turned on. Julian pointed a shaking finger at me. You will regret this, Leon. I swear to God, you are going to regret treating me like this. The only thing I regret is ever paying your tuition, I shot back. Bye now. The war was officially on. Over the next week, Julian scrambled like a rat on a sinking ship, calling every connection, every investor, trying to salvage Vance Enterprises. But the sterling name carried too much weight. Nobody wanted to cross my father. My master stroke, however, was planned for the annual city gala. It was the biggest business and social event of the year, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were made over champagne. Julian had to attend to find a lifeline. And I was going to be there to personally cut every rope he tried to climb. I arrived at the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel looking like a literal $1 billion. I wore a tailored, midnight blue velvet suit with silver embroidery that caught the chandelier light with every step. The moment I walked in, all eyes were on me. The whispers started immediately. Is that Leon Sterling? I heard he dumped Vance. He looks incredible. I grabbed a flute of champagne and began to mingle. From across the room, I spotted Julian. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes a stark contrast to his forced, desperate smile as he tried to corner an investor. Every time Julian approached someone, I would casually stroll by a few minutes later, drop a subtle hint about Vance Enterprises' impending bankruptcy, and watch the investor mysteriously excuse themselves from Julian's presence. It was a flawless, beautiful sabotage. I was standing near a towering pillar of white roses, thoroughly enjoying the sight of Julian glaring at me from across the room, when it happened. The air around me suddenly grew heavy. The chatter of the ballroom seemed to fade. A scent, sharp, overwhelming, and terrifyingly familiar, washed over me. Aged whiskey. Dark pine. The heavy ozone right before a thunderstorm. My breath hitched. My heart slammed against my ribs. No. It couldn't be. I hadn't given him my name. I hadn't left a number. I left a corporate black card registered to a shell company. Before I could turn around, a large, warm hand rested flat against my lower back, sending an electric shock straight down my spine. The body pressing up behind me was solid, radiating an alpha dominance so intense that the other guests nearby instinctively stepped back. A deep, dark baritone voice murmured right against the shell of my ear, sending shivers down my neck. Hey, little bunny. Thomas's breath ghosted over my skin as his grip on my waist tightened possessively. I caught you. I froze completely. The champagne flute in my hand trembled, the golden liquid dangerously close to spilling over the crystal rim. My brain short-circuited. Out of all the people in this city, out of all the alphas in the world, how on earth was he here? I had covered my tracks. I had used a black card registered to a dummy corporation. I slowly turned my head, my eyes dragging up the massive, tailored chest of the man standing behind me, past a perfectly tied silk cravat, until I met those piercing, tempestuous dark eyes. Thomas. He looked even more dangerous in a tuxedo, a predator wrapped in haute couture. What are you doing here? I hissed, my voice barely a whisper to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding elite. I tried to step away, but his hand gripped my waist like an iron vice. How did you find me? Look, about that night. Before I could finish the sentence, Thomas pulled me flush against his chest. His head dipped down, his lips brushing the sensitive shell of my ear. The intoxicating scent of aged whiskey and dark pine flooded my senses, making my knees incredibly weak. You left without a word, and you think everything ends. Thomas whispered back, his deep voice vibrating right through my ribs. No, my bunny. It's just the beginning. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, a wicked, dark smile playing on his lips. Now, do you want to talk about that night in front of everyone, or should we go somewhere else? I really don't mind talking right here. In fact, I'd be more than pleased to tell them all the exact details of our passionate night together. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked through my veins. I glanced around the ballroom. The socialites were already casting curious glances our way. And worst of all, Julian was only 30 feet away, glaring in our direction with narrowed eyes. If this man opened his mouth about what happened in that hotel room, my carefully orchestrated revenge plan would be overshadowed by the scandal of the century. Fine, I gritted out, grabbing the sleeve of his tuxedo. Balcony. Now. Thomas chuckled, a low, triumphant sound, and allowed me to drag him away from the sparkling chandeliers and into the cool night air. The heavy glass doors clicked shut behind us, muting the classical music from the ballroom. The balcony was massive, overlooking the glittering city skyline, and entirely empty. I immediately dropped his sleeve and took 3 large steps back, crossing my arms over my chest. I channeled every ounce of the cold, arrogant air persona I had perfected over the last week. I had to hide my fear. I couldn't let him know how much his presence, and his pheromones, affected me. All right. You found me, I said, keeping my voice utterly serious and flat. What do you want? I left you a limitless black card. If you need more money to keep quiet, just name your price, but do not threaten me in public again. Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. He moved with the lazy, terrifying grace of a panther cornering its prey. Money. Thomas echoed, stepping into my personal space. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out my metal black card, and casually dropped it into my breast pocket, patting my chest. Keep your pocket change, little bunny. I have more money than God. Do you really think a shell company could hide you from the underground? I swallowed hard, backing up until my spine hit the cold stone railing of the balcony. Who are you? Thomas, he said smoothly, placing one hand on the railing beside my head, effectively trapping me. He reached out with his other hand, shamelessly curling a lock of my hair around his finger. And you are Leon Sterling, heir to the Sterling Empire. And, interestingly enough, still legally married. My breath hitched. You investigated me thoroughly, Thomas murmured, his eyes dropping to my lips before trailing down my neck. He stepped even closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. Imagine my surprise when I found out the wild, insatiable Omega who tore my clothes off in a hotel room is married to Julian Vance. A pathetic, gold-digging alpha who has spent the last 3 years treating you like garbage. We are getting divorced, I snapped, trying to swat his hand away. But Thomas caught my wrist mid-air, bringing my knuckles to his lips and pressing a soft, lingering kiss against my skin. My face instantly flushed. I know, Thomas purred, his thumb stroking my pulse point. I know about the divorce papers. I know you cut his funding. I know you tossed him onto the pavement like a stray dog yesterday. And I have to say, Leon, I am fascinated. He leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from mine. The reports said Leon Sterling was a weeping, fragile little thing who worshipped the ground. Julian walked on. But the Leon I met. The Leon who kissed me, took me to bed, left me a tip, and is now actively destroying his husband's life. Thomas chuckled darkly, his eyes flashing with raw, unfiltered desire. That Leon is dangerous. That Leon is breathtaking. Stop touching me, I managed to say, though my voice lacked any real bite. My body was betraying me, leaning instinctively into his dominant alpha aura. Why? Thomas teased, his free hand sliding shamelessly down to grip my waist, right where the velvet of my suit pulled tight. He squeezed gently, making me gasp. You certainly didn't want me to stop touching you last week. In fact, if I remember correctly, you begged me to. Okay. Shut up. I hissed, my face burning as red as a tomato. I pushed weakly at his solid chest. That was a mistake. I was drunk, I was angry, and I didn't know what I was doing. It was a one-time thing. We are strangers. We were strangers, Thomas corrected, his grip on my waist tightening, pulling my hips flush against his. Now, we are intimately acquainted. And I don't let what belongs to me slip away so easily. I don't belong to you. You will, Thomas said, with such absolute, chilling certainty that my heart skipped a beat. He finally let go of my wrist, only to reach up and trace the line of my jaw with the back of his fingers. Finish your little game with your soon-to-be ex-husband, Leon. Bankrupt him. Ruin him. I'll even help you hide the body if you want. He leaned back, adjusting his cuffs with infuriating elegance, the wicked smile returning to his face. But once you're done playing with your food, I'm collecting my bunny. And next time you wake up in my bed, I won't let you run away. Before I could formulate a coherent, biting response, the glass doors behind him slid open. Leon. I jumped, peering around Thomas's massive shoulder. Standing in the doorway, looking confused and highly irritated, was Julian. He took in the sight of me pinned against the balcony railing by a man twice his size, and his alpha pride visibly bristled. Who is this? Julian demanded, taking a step onto the balcony. Leon, what are you doing out here with a stranger? Thomas slowly turned his head to look at Julian. The playful, teasing warmth completely vanished from Thomas's face, replaced instantly by the cold, murderous glare of a mafia king. The sudden shift in pheromones was so violently oppressive that Julian actually stumbled backward, his face draining of color. I'm sorry, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadpan octave. Did I say you could speak? Julian physically gagged. The heavy, suffocating scent of Thomas's pheromones hit Julian like a freight train, forcing him to take another humiliating step backward. His face, previously flushed with arrogant anger, drained to a sickly pale white. In the biological hierarchy of alphas, Thomas was an apex predator, and Julian was little more than a house mouse trapped in the open. Who? Julian stammered, his voice trembling as his eyes darted from Thomas's towering frame to me. He desperately tried to puff out his chest, but his knees were visibly shaking. Who do you think you are? I am his husband. For now, Thomas corrected, his voice a low, lethal rumble that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the balcony doors. He didn't even shift from his relaxed posture, yet the killing intent rolling off him was palpable. And from what I gather, you've done a spectacularly poor job of it. If I were you, I'd lower my voice before I decide to remove your vocal cords permanently. Julian swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He was terrified, but his inflated ego simply wouldn't allow him to back down in front of me. He looked at me, pointing a shaking finger. Leon, tell your friend to back off. Julian demanded, trying to sound authoritative but squeaking on the last syllable. I came out here to talk to you. The investors inside are asking questions. You need to come back in there with me right now and tell them we are perfectly fine. I looked at Julian, then looked up at Thomas, who was watching the scene with the dark, amused eyes of a lion observing a particularly stupid gazelle. I gently pushed myself away from the balcony railing and stepped around Thomas, putting myself between him and Julian. I wasn't protecting Julian, I was protecting my own entertainment. Are you deaf, Julian, or just remarkably stupid? I asked, smoothing down the velvet lapels of my suit. We aren't fine. We are getting divorced. I'm not going back in there to play the obedient, smiling Omega while you beg for scraps. Leon, please. Julian's facade cracked, his desperation finally bleeding through. You've frozen my bank accounts. You killed my shipping lines. If you don't call your father and lift the embargo tonight, Vance Enterprises will be insolvent by Monday. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Oh, don't try to play the humanitarian card with me, I scoffed, crossing my arms. You don't care about your employees. You care about your luxury car collection and your country club membership. And for the record, I already secured severance packages for your staff through the Sterling conglomerate. They'll be fine. You, on the other hand, will be out on the street. Julian's face contorted with sheer panic. He took a reckless step forward, reaching his hand out to grab my arm. Leon, you can't do this to me. I am your alpha. He never even touched my sleeve. Before I could blink, Thomas moved. It was a blur of motion. Thomas grabbed Julian's outstretched wrist, twisting it sharply downward. Julian let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp as he was forced to his knees on the cold stone of the balcony. I told you, Thomas whispered, his voice dripping with venom as he looked down at the kneeling man. Do not speak unless spoken to. And never, ever, attempt to lay your hands on him again. Do you understand me? Ah. Yes. Why yes. Let go, you're breaking it. Julian sobbed, all of his alpha pride evaporating into thin air. Thomas, let him go, I said, placing a light hand on Thomas's massive forearm. The muscles beneath his tailored sleeve were coiled tight as steel. He's not worth dirtying your suit. Thomas glanced at me, his terrifying expression instantly softening. He released Julian's wrist with a look of utter disgust, pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his hand as if he had just touched a disease. Julian scrambled backward on his hands and knees, cradling his wrist against his chest. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and disbelief. You're crazy, Leon, Julian breathed out, tears of pain pricking the corners of his eyes. You're actually going to throw away 3 years of marriage for this brute. Who even is he? I looked down at Julian, feeling absolutely nothing but sweet, intoxicating vindication. The original Leon used to cry himself to sleep, begging for a scrap of Julian's affection. Now, Julian was on his knees, weeping like a child. Him. Oh, he's my new financial advisor, I deadpanned, offering Julian a sickeningly sweet smile. He specializes in hostile takeovers and aggressive restructuring. Speaking of which, I forgot to mention my final gift to you. Julian froze, dread washing over his tear-stained face. What gift? I bought out the remaining debts you owe to the private equity firms, I announced, examining my manicured fingernails. All of them. Which means, as of 5 o'clock this evening, I am your sole creditor. And I am calling in the debts. All $40 million of it. Payable immediately. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Since you obviously don't have the cash, I continued cheerfully, I will be seizing your personal assets tomorrow morning. The penthouse, the cars, the vacation home in the Hamptons, everything. You might want to ask Max if there's room on his futon. Though, something tells me his friendship might mysteriously dry up once he realizes your wallet is empty. You monster, Julian whispered, completely broken. No, Julian. I'm a businessman, I corrected coldly. Now, get out of my sight before my financial advisor decides to audit your kneecaps. Julian didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, shooting one last terrified glance at Thomas, and bolted back through the glass doors, disappearing into the crowd like a frightened rat. Silence fell over the balcony once again. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic and the faint classical music drifting through the glass. I let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system. I had done it. Julian was finished. Suddenly, I felt the warmth of Thomas's body behind me again. He stepped close, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, pulling my back flush against his broad chest. He rested his chin on my shoulder, inhaling deeply against my neck. You are absolutely magnificent, little bunny, Thomas murmured, his voice thick with genuine admiration and dark amusement. The way you stripped him of everything. I have never been more turned on in my life. My face flushed crimson all over again. I weakly grabbed his forearms, trying to pry him off. Hey, personal space. And don't call me little bunny. Thomas chuckled, pressing a soft kiss to the crook of my neck. Why not? You have quite the bite. I like it. He slowly turned me around in his arms, his large hands resting gently but firmly on my hips. The dangerous mafia boss from a moment ago was gone, replaced by the intensely obsessive alpha who had wrecked my hotel room. You handled your trash beautifully, Thomas said, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. I'm proud of you. I don't need your approval, I grumbled, though I couldn't bring myself to step out of his embrace. His pheromones were too intoxicating, wrapping around me like a warm, heavy blanket. I know you don't. That's exactly why I want you, Thomas smiled, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine in an agonizingly slow, tantalizing kiss. I gasped into his mouth, my hands instinctively gripping his lapels. He pulled back just as I was leaning in for more, leaving me breathless and frustrated. Finish the divorce, Leon, Thomas whispered softly, his thumb tracing my lower lip. Take his penthouse. Take his cars. Kick him into the gutter. I'll be watching. He took a step back, releasing me from his magnetic hold. The sudden loss of his body heat made me shiver. I have business to attend to tonight, Thomas said, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit as if he hadn't just been holding me hostage. But I will see you soon. And next time, you won't be able to run. With a final, devastating smirk, the Mafia King turned and walked back into the ballroom, parting the crowd of elites like the Red Sea. I stood on the balcony for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, my lips still tingling from his touch. I had just destroyed my worst enemy, but as I touched my chest, feeling the heavy metal black card resting in my pocket, I realized my life was about to get infinitely more complicated. I should have known better. I had dismantled Julian's empire, frozen his assets, and publicly humiliated him, but I forgot the most basic rule of hunting: a cornered rat is the most dangerous. I was walking out of a late-night meeting with my father's legal team, heading toward my armored car in the underground parking garage. The next thing I knew, a cloth smelling sickeningly of chemicals was clamped over my mouth and nose. I kicked, I thrashed, but strong arms dragged me into the back of an unmarked van. Then, everything faded to black. My consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by a splitting headache and the taste of copper in my mouth. I groaned, my eyes fluttering open. The air was damp and smelled of mildew. I was tied to a rigid metal chair in the center of a massive, empty warehouse. The only illumination came from a single, dusty bulb swaying gently above my head, casting long, eerie shadows against the concrete floor. I pulled at my wrists. Thick, rough rope dug into my skin. I was completely trapped. Look who finally decided to wake up. The sound of slow, mocking applause echoed through the darkness. Two figures stepped out of the shadows and into the dim pool of light. Julian and Max. They weren't wearing their usual designer clothes or innocent pastels. They looked disheveled, frantic, but their faces were twisted into identical, devilish smiles. The sweet, timid aura Max always projected was completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. Max strutted forward, grabbed a fistful of my hair, and yanked my head back. Smack. The slap echoed sharply in the cavernous room. My cheek burned, and my head snapped to the side, but I forced myself to look back at him, my eyes blazing with defiance. Max threw his head back and let out a cold, sharp laugh. See, Julian. This fool actually thought he could ruin our lives. He thought he was the one pulling the strings. Max leaned in close to my face, his eyes wide and manic. You don't know anything, Leon. You think Julian falling for you was an accident. You think his crushing debt was real. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? It was a setup from day one, you spoiled brat, Max sneered, pacing around my chair. We researched you. We knew you had a soft spot for tragic sob stories. We fabricated the hospital bills. We staged the whole, poor, struggling alpha routine just so you would swoop in with your daddy's checkbook. We made you fall in love so you would pay our way to the top. Julian stepped forward, pulling a heavy metal pipe from his belt. He tapped it rhythmically against his palm, his eyes filled with a terrifying, hollow desperation. You used to follow me around like an obedient little dog, Julian muttered, his voice devoid of any of the warmth he used to fake. You worshipped the ground I walked on. Why did you suddenly change, Leon? Why did you have to wake up and ruin everything? Because I realized I was married to a parasite, I spat, tasting blood on my lip. You're pathetic, Julian. Both of you. Julian's face darkened, and he swung the pipe, striking me hard in the ribs. I gasped in agony as pain flared through my side, stealing the breath from my lungs. I strained against the ropes, my vision spotting with black dots. I didn't want to kill you, Julian said coldly, standing over me. I was perfectly fine letting you live in that penthouse, playing the oblivious, devoted wife. But now, you forced my hand. Your existence is a problem for us. If you die, all your assets, the ones you just seized from me, transfer back to your legal spouse. You think you'll get away with this? I wheezed, coughing. My father will hunt you down. Your father will think you couldn't handle the stress of the divorce and took your own life, Max chimed in, resting his chin on Julian's shoulder with a sickening smile. It's perfect. Then Julian and I can finally raise our son in peace. I froze. Son. Julian laughed at my shocked expression. That's right, Leon. Max and I have a 2-year-old boy. He's been living comfortably in a suburban mansion, fully funded by the Sterling family accounts. Why do you think I never marked you? Why I never actually consummated our marriage after the first few months? I belonged to Max. You were just the bank. The depths of their depravity were staggering. The original Leon had given them his heart, his soul, and his family's fortune, and they had used it to build a secret life behind his back. Oh, but wait, it gets better, Max giggled maliciously. Tell him about the nights you worked late, Julian. Julian smirked, crouching down to my eye level. You always wondered why you were so tired, why you slept so heavily at night. I drugged your tea, Leon. Every single night. While you were passed out, dreaming that I was sleeping beside you, I was either across town with Max, or I was hosting my business partners right in your living room. My stomach churned violently. You did what? My investors wanted collateral. They wanted to know I had absolute control over the Sterling heir, Julian whispered, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. So, I drug you, invite them over, and let them walk around your penthouse. Let them mock the great, untouchable Leon Sterling passed out on the sofa like a heavily medicated doll. They took photos of you. They laughed at you. You were nothing but a bargaining chip to them. And you never knew a thing. Rage, hotter and brighter than anything I had ever felt, exploded in my chest. I thrashed violently against the chair, the ropes tearing the skin from my wrists. I wanted to tear them apart with my bare hands. I wanted to see them burn. Julian stood back up, his expression hardening into cold resolve. It's time to end this. Hold him still, Max. Julian raised the heavy metal pipe high above his head. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the fatal impact. Crash. The deafening sound of an explosion shook the entire warehouse. The massive steel rolling doors at the front of the building were violently blown off their tracks, sending a shockwave of dust, smoke, and debris tearing through the air. Julian screamed, dropping the pipe and covering his face as pieces of metal rained down. Max shrieked, scrambling behind Julian in sheer terror. Before the smoke could even clear, dozens of heavily armed men in immaculate dark suits poured into the warehouse. They moved with terrifying, silent precision. Laser sights cut through the dusty air, locking directly onto Julian and Max's chests. Julian's cheap hired thugs, who were hiding in the shadows, were disarmed and forced to their knees in less than 10 seconds. Don't move. Hands where I can see them. A voice barked over the chaos. Julian and Max threw their hands in the air, trembling violently as 5 men surrounded them, assault rifles pointed directly at their heads. The chaos suddenly settled into a suffocating, dead silence. The armed men parted perfectly down the middle, creating a wide path leading directly to me. The air temperature in the warehouse seemed to plummet. A scent completely overwhelmed the smell of dust and chemicals, the heavy, intoxicating, and utterly terrifying scent of dark pine, aged whiskey, and a brewing thunderstorm. Footsteps echoed rhythmically against the concrete. Slow, methodical, predatory. Thomas emerged from the smoke. He didn't look like a businessman today. He was dressed in a long, dark overcoat over a black turtleneck, looking every inch the ruthless mafia king he was rumored to be. His face was carved from granite, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. But it was his eyes that were the most terrifying. They were completely black, devoid of any human mercy, locked onto the bruised, bleeding side of my face. He walked past Julian and Max as if they were nothing but insects. He stepped up to my chair, dropping to one knee. He reached out with terrifying gentleness, his large, warm hand cupping my uninjured cheek. Bunny, Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with a barely contained, earth-shattering rage. Who did this to you? I looked up into his dark eyes, the adrenaline finally leaving my system, leaving me exhausted but overwhelmingly relieved. I leaned into his touch, letting out a shaky breath. They did, I rasped. Thomas's eyes flicked to the thick ropes binding my wrists. He pulled a sleek, silver combat knife from his coat and sliced through the thick ropes in one fluid, effortless motion. I slumped forward, and Thomas caught me instantly, wrapping his massive arms around my shoulders and burying my face in his chest. His pheromones flared, wrapping around me in a protective, soothing cocoon. He held me for a long moment, ensuring I was safe. Then, he slowly stood up, turning to face Julian and Max. The Devil King had arrived, and hell was coming with him. You have exactly 10 seconds, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a demonic, vibrating growl that made the armed men around him subconsciously take a step back. To explain to me why I shouldn't skin you both alive right here on this floor. The warehouse was so silent you could hear the dust settling against the concrete. Thomas's ultimatum hung in the air, a guillotine suspended by a single, fraying thread. Julian's jaw opened and closed silently. The metal pipe he had dropped lay near Thomas's polished Italian leather shoes. He was completely paralyzed by the suffocating weight of Thomas's alpha aura. But Max, entirely blinded by years of successfully manipulating everyone around him, made the final, fatal mistake of his life. Thinking he could somehow use his fragile Omega charm to sway this terrifying man, Max pushed past Julian and dropped to his knees. He forced fresh tears to spill over his eyelashes, clasping his hands together in a prayer. Please, sir. Max sobbed, his voice pitching into a sickeningly sweet, trembling register. You don't understand. Leon is the evil one. He's crazy. He ruined Julian's company, he froze all our money, he tried to leave us with nothing. We just wanted to talk to him, to make him see reason, but he started attacking us. We had to defend ourselves. I let out a weak, dry laugh from where I was slumped in the chair. Are you actually trying your White Lotus routine on a mafia boss? Thomas didn't even look at Max. His pitch black eyes remained locked on my face. He reached out with terrifying gentleness, his thumb lightly grazing the swelling red mark on my cheek. Defend yourselves, Thomas repeated, his voice a silky, deadly whisper. Against an Omega tied to a chair. Max froze, realizing his logic was fundamentally flawed. I mean, who slapped him? Thomas interrupted, his tone completely flat. Silence. Thomas's eyes finally slid from my face to the two trembling figures on the floor. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. I am not going to ask again. Who put this mark on his face? He did. Julian suddenly shrieked, his survival instincts overriding whatever twisted loyalty he had left for his lover. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Max. Max slapped him. I told him not to, but he did it. Julian. Max gasped, staring at him in horrified betrayal. Thomas tilted his head. He stepped over the metal pipe, walking slowly toward Max. Every step echoed like the tolling of a death bell. No, please. Max scrambled backward, kicking his legs, but two of Thomas's massive men in dark suits stepped forward, grabbing Max by the shoulders and slamming him face first into the concrete. Max screamed as one of the men yanked his right arm out, pinning it flat against the ground. Thomas stood over him, looking down with the absolute detachment of a god examining an insect. This hand? Thomas asked softly. Yes, please, I'm sorry. I'll never touch him again. Max wailed, tears and snot mixing on his face as he trashed uselessly. You're absolutely right, Thomas agreed, a dark, cruel smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. You won't. Thomas raised his foot and brought his heavy, steel-shanked heel down directly onto Max's wrist. The sickening crack of shattering bone echoed through the massive warehouse, followed immediately by Max's blood-curdling scream. He thrashed like a dying fish, his voice tearing at the vocal cords as he looked at his hand, which was now bent at a horrific, unnatural angle. I flinched at the sound, my breath hitching. In a split second, Thomas was back at my side. The cruel, demonic Mafia King vanished, replaced instantly by the deeply obsessive Alpha who had held me in the dark. He pulled my face into his chest, burying his face in my hair. Shish, don't look, my bunny, Thomas murmured, his voice thick with honey and absolute devotion. He pressed a kiss to my temple, his large hands rubbing soothing circles into my back. I've got you. You're safe. Nobody will ever hurt you again. While Thomas held me, his eyes dragged over the rest of my body, assessing the damage. When his gaze landed on the dark, blossoming bruise on my ribs where the metal pipe had struck me, the soothing circles on my back stopped abruptly. I felt the muscles in his chest turn to solid stone. His pheromones spiked, a violent storm of ozone and rage. The pipe, Thomas growled, his voice vibrating through my cheek. He didn't even look back at Julian. He just gave a slight nod to his men. 4 guards immediately descended on Julian. Julian screamed, throwing wild punches, but he was instantly overwhelmed. They dragged him to the center of the room, forcing him onto his stomach and pinning both of his arms out wide. Wait, I'm his husband. You can't do this to me. Julian shrieked, his face scraping against the dirty concrete. Leon, tell them to stop. Leon, please, I'm the father of a child. Thomas slowly untangled himself from me, though he kept one hand protectively on my shoulder. He looked down at Julian, his eyes burning with a sadistic, unholy fire. You lost the right to call yourself his husband the second you let another alpha put their hands on him, Thomas sneered, his voice dripping with pure disgust. And you lost the right to live the second you swung that pipe. Thomas casually picked up the heavy metal pipe from the floor. He weighed it in his hand, his eyes locking onto Julian's pinned right arm. Please. I'll give you everything. Julian begged, pissing his expensive trousers in sheer terror. I'll give him the company. I'll give him the house. He already took those, Thomas stated coldly. What I am taking, is retribution. Thomas swung the pipe down with terrifying, bone-crushing force directly onto Julian's right hand. The sound of Julian's scream was completely deafening, a raw, animalistic howl of pure agony. Blood splattered against the concrete as the heavy metal crushed the bones in his hand to absolute powder. But Thomas wasn't done. With a terrifyingly blank expression, he swung it again. And again. Smash. 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 He didn't stop until Julian's hand was nothing more than a mangled, unrecognizable ruin, and Julian had completely passed out from the shock, his head lolling sideways in a pool of his own saliva and tears. Max, watching the destruction of the man he loved from a few feet away, was hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably into the dust. Thomas dropped the bloodied pipe. It clattered loudly against the floor. He pulled out a fresh silk handkerchief, wiped the invisible speck of dust from his hands, and tossed the cloth onto Julian's unconscious body. Boss, one of the men in suits stepped forward, bowing his head respectfully. What do you want us to do with the trash? Thomas turned his back on the carnage, stepping back to my chair. Wake him up, Thomas ordered, gesturing vaguely to Julian. Take them both to the black site. I want names. I want the names of every single business partner who set foot in Leon's penthouse while he was drugged. I want the location of the child, and I want the kid handed over to Child Protective Services with a new identity. Erase these two from the face of the earth. And after we get the information, sir? The guard asked. Thomas's eyes flashed darkly. Keep them alive. Barely. Let them rot in the dark until they beg you for death. And then, make them wait a few more years. Understood, boss. The men hauled Julian and Max up by their collars, dragging them toward the waiting vans outside. Max was sobbing hysterically, pleading for a mercy he was never going to receive, while Julian remained a limp, broken doll. Once the warehouse was clear of their sickening presence, Thomas crouched down in front of me. He carefully unbuttoned his heavy, dark overcoat and wrapped it around my shivering shoulders. The coat smelled of him, safe, powerful, and overwhelmingly warm. Can you walk, little bunny? He asked, his voice returning to that soft, incredibly gentle purr. He reached up, tucking a stray piece of hair behind my ear. I think so, I mumbled, though my entire body felt like lead. Before I could even attempt to stand, Thomas slipped one arm behind my back and the other under my knees, lifting me into his chest effortlessly, bridal style. I gasped, instinctually wrapping my arms around his thick neck. Don't strain yourself, Thomas murmured, pressing a firm, protective kiss to my forehead. He held me so securely I felt completely weightless. You are never lifting a finger again unless it's to point at something you want. I rested my head against his shoulder, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat. The terror of the last few hours washed away, replaced by an undeniable, magnetic pull toward the ruthless monster who held me like I was made of glass. Where are we going? I whispered tiredly, my eyes drifting shut as his pheromones lulled my battered senses. Thomas chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound in his chest, as he carried me out of the ruined warehouse and into the cool night air. Home, Leon, Thomas promised, his grip tightening protectively around my waist. My territory. Where absolutely nothing in this world will ever touch you again. The weeks following the warehouse incident were a masterclass in systematic destruction. I was resting in Thomas's sprawling, fortress-like estate, being pampered with breakfast in bed and silk pajamas, while the Devil King went to work. True to his word, Thomas extracted every single name from Julian and Max. Every corrupt investor, every sleazy business partner, every alpha who had ever stepped foot into my penthouse to mock the drugged, sleeping Leon Sterling. One by one, they fell. Some woke up to find their multinational corporations entirely bankrupt, their offshore accounts drained to zero. Others simply vanished in the middle of the night, leaving behind nothing but a profound, terrifying silence. The city's elite whispered about a phantom clearing house, completely unaware that the apex predator of the underworld was simply doing a little spring cleaning for his Omega. One crisp morning, Thomas walked into the sunlit conservatory where I was sipping tea. He was dressed in a sharp three-piece suit, looking impossibly handsome, and dropped a thick manila folder onto the glass table. The last of them, Thomas announced smoothly, leaning down to press a lingering kiss to the crown of my head. Senator Hastings. He officially resigned in disgrace this morning after a sudden, inexplicable leak of his illegal offshore activities. He's currently fleeing the country. My men are ensuring his flight is permanently delayed. I opened the folder, flipping through the ruined lives of the men who had violated my space. I felt no pity, only a cold, absolute satisfaction. Thank you, Thomas, I said, looking up at him with a warm smile. Never thank me for taking out the trash, my bunny, Thomas murmured. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down, his large hand enveloping mine. Anyone who ever looked at you with disrespect, anyone who ever dared to touch a hair on your head, they are gone. The slate is wiped clean. Despite Thomas's promise that I would never have to lift a finger again, I refused to be a fragile bird locked in a gilded cage. I had been kidnapped once. I wasn't going to let it happen a second time. Again, Thomas barked, his voice echoing in the massive, state-of-the-art training gym located in the basement of the estate. I gritted my teeth, wiping sweat from my forehead, and threw another punch. Thomas caught my fist effortlessly in his massive, tape-wrapped hand. He stepped into my space, his chest brushing against mine. Your footing is sloppy, Leon. If I were an attacker, you'd already be on the floor, he scolded, though the dark, appreciative look in his eyes as he scanned my form-fitting workout gear completely contradicted his strict tone. Maybe I'm distracted because my instructor keeps staring at my ass, I shot back, panting. Thomas chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. He slid his hands to my hips, physically correcting my stance. Hips square. Center your gravity. You don't have the brute strength of an alpha, so you have to use momentum. If they grab you from behind, strike the throat, drop your weight, and flip. He stepped behind me, wrapping his thick arms around my waist to simulate a hold. The scent of pine and whiskey flooded my senses. I smirked. Dropping my weight exactly as he taught me, I grabbed his forearm, twisted my hips, and threw him over my shoulder. To his credit, Thomas let himself be thrown. He hit the padded mat with a heavy thud. Before he could recover, I straddled his waist, pinning his arms above his head. I leaned down, a triumphant grin on my face. Dead. Thomas looked up at me, his eyes dark and dilated, a completely mesmerized smile on his lips. I surrender. Take me as your prisoner. Do whatever you want to me. You are the worst mafia boss in history, I laughed, releasing his wrists. Before I could sit up, Thomas's hands shot to my waist. He rolled us over in a flash, pinning my back to the mat. His body hovered heavily over mine, his intense gaze softening into pure adoration. Only for you, he whispered, capturing my lips in a deep, passionate kiss. We stayed on the mats for a long time, the training completely forgotten, lost in the intoxicating heat of each other's touch. The original Leon had craved love so desperately that he bought it. But I didn't need to buy Thomas's love, he practically worshipped the ground I walked on. With my heart secure, I turned my attention to my true passion, building my own empire. I didn't use Thomas's underworld money, and I didn't rely on my father's conglomerate. Using the massive fortune I legally stripped from Julian's bankruptcy, I founded Apex Innovations, a venture capital firm specializing in high-level tech and security. Armed with the modern world knowledge from my past life, I knew exactly which startups would explode and which would fail. Within a year, Apex became a juggernaut in the financial district. I was no longer just the Sterling heir. I was CEO Leon Sterling, a ruthless, brilliant businessman who terrified older alphas in boardrooms. And Thomas. He was my biggest, most terrifying fanboy. I was sitting behind my sleek mahogany desk on the top floor of the Apex building, reviewing a contract, when the heavy office doors swung open. My secretary didn't even try to stop him. Everyone in the building knew better than to block the Devil King. Thomas strolled in, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, carrying a paper bag from my favorite artisan bakery. "You missed lunch," Thomas stated, his tone brooking no argument as he set the bag on my desk and pulled my rolling chair away from the monitors. "I was closing a merger, Tommy," I sighed, though I happily took the warm croissant he handed me. "The merger can wait. My Omega needs to eat." Thomas leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing his arms as he watched me. "I heard the CEO of rival tech firm tried to intimidate you in the meeting today." I rolled my eyes. Alpha posturing. He tried to use his pheromones to make me back down on the equity split. It didn't work. I crushed him. "I know you did," Thomas smirked, his chest swelling with pride. "But I still bought out his company's supplier this afternoon. He'll be begging you for a meeting by tomorrow." "Thomas, I told you I don't need you to fight my corporate battles." I groaned, throwing a piece of croissant at him. He caught it effortlessly, eating it with a wicked grin. "I'm not fighting your battles, Bunny. I'm just paving the road for my king. Now, finish your lunch. We have a cake tasting at 4. 2 years after the day I woke up in this novel, I found myself standing in the grand vestibule of the city's most historic cathedral. The original novel had ended with Julian's triumph and Leon's tragic, penniless demise. But today, the world belonged to me. The cathedral was packed with the most powerful figures in the country. Half the pews were filled with legitimate billionaires, politicians, and socialites from my side of the world. The other half was filled with the terrifying, silent, fiercely loyal elite of Thomas's underground empire. Chloe, wearing a stunning emerald bridesmaid gown, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I can't believe it. You're actually getting married to the scariest man on the planet, and you look absolutely flawless. Try not to ugly cry, Chloe." "Dante is recording," I teased, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored white suit, intricately embroidered with silver thread. "I'm not crying. It's allergies." Chloe sniffled, throwing her arms around me. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. The majestic swell of the organ echoed through the vaulted ceilings. I took a deep breath, linking my arm with my father's, and began the walk down the aisle. The moment I stepped into the light, every eye in the room turned to me. But I only saw him. Thomas stood at the altar. He wore a stark black tuxedo that contrasted perfectly with my white suit. He looked like a god of war, imposing, lethal, and devastatingly handsome. But as I walked closer, I saw the raw, unfiltered emotion in his dark eyes. The ruthless mafia boss, a man who didn't flinch at the sight of blood or the collapse of empires, had tears glistening in his eyes. When my father handed me over, Thomas gripped my hands as if I were his lifeline. His hands, usually so steady and dangerous, were actually trembling. "You are breathtaking," he whispered, completely ignoring the priest and the hundreds of guests. "You don't look so bad yourself," I whispered back, a brilliant smile breaking across my face. The vows were a blur of beautiful words, but it was the quiet, whispered promises beneath the grand speeches that mattered. When Thomas slipped the heavy, custom-made diamond ring onto my finger, his thumb brushed against my pulse point. "I promise to worship you, to protect you, and to stand behind you while you conquer the world," Thomas vowed, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "You are my heart, Leon. My soul. My everything. And I promise to keep you on your toes," I replied, my eyes shining with happy tears. To build our empire together, and to love you for the rest of my lives. I now pronounce you husband and husband, the priest declared, smiling widely. You may kiss. Thomas didn't waste a millisecond. He pulled me flush against his chest, his hand tangling in my hair, and kissed me with a passionate, earth-shattering intensity that made the entire cathedral erupt in deafening cheers. As his lips moved perfectly against mine, I closed my eyes, feeling a profound sense of peace. The original Leon had died craving a love that was always a lie. But I had rewritten the story. I had the wealth, I had the power, I had my independence, and most importantly, I had a love so deep and true it transcended lifetimes. The tragic Omega was dead. Long live the king.